Get ready to dare to wonder what your life would be like if you knew you could not fail. Hey, everybody, welcome. It's so great to have all of you tune us in and turn us on. We are excited about this 11 o'clock hour on Friday. And yet at the same time, we certainly miss Christine Upchurch. I think all of us do. But for those of you out there, it is so exciting to honor all of you and the journey that you've said yes to. And that is such an important thing for me to remember to do. It never gets old on me. 20 years next year, and it's still not old on me that you're the best audience on the planet. There's by far the best. And special message, right? Let's give a special message, if we could, to Susie Hutchins, right? Who sent us the card. You ready for this, Benny and William? Here we go. Susie, in your honor, I bought new rubber for my table tennis bat. In your honor, thank you for encouraging me to keep playing. See, I think my guest is like, am I on the right show? Who are these people? Well, I think she's got it going on. You cannot write a book like the book she wrote, and you cannot do the work like the work she does. You just can't, and not have a big fat smile on your face. I'm talking about Dr. Megan Rose joining me here today. We are really going to get into it because this is one of these books. Benny, I read all the books, right? Benny, William, you guys know I do that, right? Yeah. But every once in a while, you get a book that you just need to keep close to you, right? It's one of these books that you pick up and you read it, and you're like, what? Spirit marriage, intimate relationships with otherworldly beings. Now, I'm reading this book, and I got taken back in time. And Benny, I don't remember the year. I don't think you do either. But I got taken back in time to the first workshop Dr. Jean Houston did in her new leadership platform. So we were the guinea pig people. And a woman that I love, even in spirit, Dr. Angela Sarian, the time she was on the earth, became my mentor. But this was my first initiation. I had been initiated in vision questing, but this was my first initiation into what Dr. Megan Rose is writing about here, right? And the foreword is written by Orion. But what I want to say about this is the minute we realize and are willing to put down, I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm just going to talk to myself. The minute that I was willing to put down my arrogance and my ego, to think that the only thing that there was for me in accelerating and ascending was my earth skin. The minute that I could take that thought and say, you may not be your earth skin, Pat, but what about spirit marriage? It's such the idea is mind-blowing, and yet go back thousands and thousands of years and the stories we tell and visions and amazing things that we have seen and written about. I mean, seriously, every mummy movie that was ever generated had to do with this, right? So it's in our pop culture, but Dr. Megan Rose is going to talk to us about it's now everywhere. So what I love about this is she actually studied where I really wish I would have studied. She studied at Eat West Psychology. She's got a doctorate in that, California Institute of Integral Studies. And I'm not even going to get into all of that. But the minute that I read the book, I thought, oh, she has been initiated. She helps initiations. She is all about being that fantastic Shakta Tantric practitioner. She is a senior seer. She is. When I looked at all of that and I picked up the book, I thought, am I going to be speaking with Earth Skin, Dr. Megan Rose, or spiritual entity, Dr. Megan Rose? Dr. Rose, great to have you.
Wonderful to be here. Guess what? You get both.
I hope they told you that we do have a little fun here. I hope Gail and folks have just said to you that we talk about the serious nature of things, but we also really look at the multidimensional nature of spirit.
Yeah.
And if you grew up in certain religious practices, maybe you grew up with the idea that spirit was dark and punishing. Maybe that's your experience. Or maybe you grew up with the idea that there is an exploration and a practice and something that's highly relevant when we think about these connections we have. So why have we, for so long, avoided the conversation about spirit marriage?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of layers there, I think.
Yes.
You could look at that from an evolutionary perspective and the idea of humans. And I think my research really points to by these spirit beings from the beginning of our species, right? But we're really at a tipping point right now on our planet. We face certain depending on who you talk to, we're facing a certain extinction of our species unless we sort of get it together and evolve our consciousness to the point of understanding that humans, right, are not the one right and only species on this planet to determine the fate of the planet. And really understand that we need to step out of our anthropocentric worldview, which says humans are the peak of the pinnacle of creation, and step into more of what I like to call a sort of eco-psychological or Gaia consciousness perspective, which is we are but one of many players on the planet right now, with myriad levels of intelligence and consciousness. And my research is really rooted in an animist view of the planet. The planet is alive around us, and we are in dialogue and relationship with it, from the tiniest little mycelium, right, to the largest oceanic bodies full of consciousnesses nested within consciousnesses, nested within consciousnesses. And so, spirit marriage is on a continuum of different types of relationship, right, that we can have with the other than human that we share our gorgeous planet with. And I truly believe that although these relationships have guided humanity from, the very, our many creation and origin myths transculturally talk about spirit marriages as one of the things that gave rise to Homo sapien, right, to the consciousness of humanity.
Yeah.
And I think that we're at another tipping point where these relationships are coming forward. They've never fully gone away. My research absolutely indicates that, and particularly in marginalized or subaltern practice, it's been alive and well, coming out of, the African diaspora traditions and a lot of earth-based indigenous spiritualities. And that's sort of another reason why they've been suppressed, because that mainstream religion by and large suppressed a lot of those traditions and persecuted them. But that it's coming forward now, and we're having this conversation now. And I wrote this book because now is the time where we need to take another leap forward, right? As Barbara Marcus Hubbard talks about. One
of the things,
sapien, like consciousness, and instead of the we consciousness, the us.
Yeah. One of the things I want to do, Benny, is let's hop over to break, because one of the things I want to just say before we go to break in support of Dr. Rose is, first of all, as Homo sapiens, we got in this game late. I just want to be very, very clear. We act as if we've been here all time. Like we act as if the earth popped up and then like we came next. Oh no. That is not what the science will tell us, right? Many iterations of things happen. And I will say this before we go to break, that this is prevalent in our pop culture and we just don't know it. Now, how do I know that? Okay, because I just get plugged in. But two things I want to leave you with for break. One, nobody can tell me that Greta Thunberg did not pop out of that womb being a young child growing into a young adult of consciousness and is so attached to the energies and the spiritual nature of the planet, even death threats to her and her family would not stop her. The second thing I want to say is when I asked Sister Michael Anthony and Bishop, I'm just going to call him Bishop Jones in Catholic boarding school, if they were married, what do you think they said to me, this wild child in Catholic boarding? What did they say to me? And then what did I say back to them? Let's take a short break. Dr. Megan Rose is here. We got so much to cover in this book. You know, her studies and her research, just fascinating. That's how you know when you've been called to do something. And then you step into the full blossom of what that is. Let's take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back.
All clear.
Thank you. I went to a quick break because I think your phone internet thing was is glitching.
There isn't a magic pill
okay.
to creating your healthy
Yeah.
lifestyle. Yet it doesn't
It's
have
definitely
to
gotten
be
better,
hard or
but,
feel impossible.
Okay.
Health
Yeah,
works from the inside
definitely
out,
got
connecting
pretty
both your
bad at
body
that one
and
point,
your
so
mind.
it's good you called it.
Georgette
Okay, so
LePage
what you
lives
guys
and
can do
breathes
for
what she
me, if I don't
teaches,
pick
so
up
allow
on
her
it,
to be
just
living proof
pop
of what
us in
can
a
work
chat
for you.
message,
Connect
and
with her
then
now for a
I
free
will jump
30-minute
in.
discovery
So what
session to
happens
see
is
what
I'm
results you
jumping
are
in and
looking for
talking over
and how
you,
she
not
can help
because
you
I don't
get them.
generally do that.
Visit
But I'm doing it
GeorgetteLePage.com.
right.
If I'm glitching. Got it.
Yeah. Cool.
So
Are
I'm
you
gonna.
having
I can try
difficulty
and
feeling
switch.
at
I
home
don't
in
know
your
how long the
own
break is,
home?
but I can try and switch to
Join
my
Annette
computer
Rigola
bandwidth
and
because my
Dr. Pat
partner got
in
it up
enlightened
and working again.
environments,
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're going to see
optimizing
me
from the
on here
outside in,
twice.
as
That's
they
fine.
present a
Then,
deep dive into the various
and then I'll
vibrations
jump
of the
off
earth,
my
Okay.
phone.
along with
Okay.
man-made
And William, you
energies
can
that
handle that,
impact our
Benny?
lives. Using
Yes,
the
ma'am.
diamond dowsing
All right,
method,
cool.
we will utilize specific
like
vibrations to elevate our own homes to support us and
It says,
expand
please
us
wait, the
with our
broadcaster will
energy.
let you in soon. So
Join us
just
every
waiting for
third
y'all.
Wednesday at 10:30
That's
a.m.
William.
Pacific time to make your home home.
All right.
Healing has a ripple effect. One person's healing
Gotcha.
affects everyone around them. This is
Just
where
want
the
you to
power
turn
of
one of them
sharing our
off.
stories can be so important. Tune in to Playing on the
All
Edge
right, there you
Radio
go.
with Megan Edge each month on Transformation Talk Radio, as Megan provides you with ways of sustaining radical and powerful changes in your life. Enact the power of radical change.
All right.
To find out
Rocking and
more
rolling.
about Megan Edge,
You got
visit
it.
her
Can you
website
hear me?
at meganedge.ca.
Perfectly well. Thank you, William. How we doing?
If you could just
Did
raise
you
your
know that
camera
when
up
we
just
talk
the
about
slightest
the
amount,
Earth
Can you hear me?
ecosystems, the most
Me
important
or
ecosystem
Megan?
has been left out?
Megan.
You.
Okay.
We
Megan,
created
can you just
the
lift your
ecosystem
camera up
approach
just a slight
to
bit?
recapture
Give you a little
human
bit more
potential.
headroom.
Find us
Can you
at
hear us?
theecosystemapproach.org.
I don't think she
Join
can
us
hear
every
you can
Monday
hear
at
us
1
right
p.m.
now.
Pacific Time and 4 p.m. Eastern Time for the Ecosystem Approach Show
Can you hear us
with
now?
Jason and Patricia on
Why don't you type a little message into her while I
TransformationTalkRadio.com.
bring us back?
You
If
got
you
it.
could type a little message into her, maybe get
Are
her
you
phone,
ready
maybe
to
you
put
can
down
help
that
us.
drink or drug
Copy.
for good?
All right.
Are you
And then Benny
struggling to
will bring me
maintain your
back. I'm
recovery
ready to
from
start,
addictive
Benny. I can get
behaviors?
rolling.
Do you need help with a family member or loved one who's in early recovery or battling addiction? Get the help and guidance you need
So
by
whenever you're ready,
arranging a
Mr. Benny.
recovery recharged phone session with me, Ellen Stewart, Pushy Broad from the Bronx, certified life
thank
and
you, Benny.
recovery coach. Call
Goodness, that break
1-800
isn't done yet.
889
I'm
1757.
Awesome. Can you hear us
Make
now?
an appointment
All right, great.
today,
You can hear
or
me.
go to my
All right,
website,
good.
pushybroadfromthebronx.com, and click
You
on
know,
the link
it happens
that says Recovery
every day.
Recharged. Don't wait.
You know,
Get the help you need.
this is
today.
one of my
This
flagship
is Ellen
networks, and
Stewart,
then
Pushy
we
Broad from the
also
Bronx
run
on
the Transformation Network.
TransformationTalkRadio.com.
So we go through this every hour, like 40 hours a week.
Technology. It was supposed to make our lives easier.
Ready to come back?
Thank you, Benny.
Stand by.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's so great to have all of you tune us in and turn us on. Dr. Megan, before we jump ahead, tell people how they get a copy of this book and how they find out more about you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So Spirit Marriage is available at all major booksellers, online, and hopefully getting into stores. Although I guess it would be at some of the smaller stores because some of the larger booksellers don't have physical locations anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
And then also you can find out more about me at drmeganrose.com. And you can also go to spiritmarriage.com. There's a website just for the book.
There's a couple things in the forward I want to start with, and then I want to answer that question of what I said, the way Sister Michael Anthony answered it. There's a statement in the forward of the book that is by Orion. It's finally the time is now. The bottom line is that humans are moving rapidly into an age of expanded and fluid states of consciousness, and we must perceive the invisible relationships between visible things if we are to grow with our own destiny. We are human becoming. We are not finished growing in our understanding of healing, the intimate workings of our planet, the causes and cures for maladies likely induced by human technology, and actions that impact nature in ways we cannot see. See, this is like a statement of warning and yet a statement of hopefulness. Now, let's get to pop culture and let's say a little bit about religion. When I asked Sister Michael Anthony, of course, I'm very young, should have never been in the Catholic boarding school, but I asked them, are they married? Like, my dad was getting, right, the whole thing. And their answer was interesting to me. And I believed it. And I actually still believe it to this day. And the answer was, I'm married to God. That was the answer back then when I was a child. I don't know what the answers now are in the practice of Catholicism. But you understand that at 6 years old, nobody told me that they couldn't be married to God. Hence, here we go. Right? And that may seem like a benign example, but it's a very important example to make in one of the largest groups out there that believe that. And unless they've changed the thing like they did, eat meat on Friday, they changed that. But unless they change this idea, this is embedded.
Yeah.
And why is that okay? But other forms that you have in the book, not.
There you go. I mean, that's the age-old question, right? I like to say
it's a big one.
I like to say that it is the practice that is hidden in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
Which is one of the headings or chapters in the book. Hidden within plain sight. It is there. We know about it because of the Catholic tradition of the nuns and the priests marrying Jesus or marrying the church. And that is, you're not the only person to have a monastic say that. I was being interviewed for Jeffrey Mishlov's New Thinking Aloud, and the interviewer said, I was told the same thing when I was in Catholic school as a child. I asked the nun, are you married? And she said, I'm married to Jesus.
Yeah.
So it is very much still a practice and an understanding that it is a bonded commitment. And in their case, it tends to be more celibate. Although if you go back a few hundred years and look at the Beguines, it was decidedly not a celibate practice. Meaning there was erotic encounters that were happening between the monastics and Jesus. And so, what I like to say is, within the purview of Christianity has said, well, if you have contact with our group of spirits, you're okay. You can talk to God, you can talk to Jesus, you can talk to the Holy Spirit, you can talk to even maybe some saints and angels, but anybody outside of this little, in group is dangerous or evil or bad or, all these other things. And so when we step into this conversation, putting our sort of decolonialist and indigenous spirituality hats on, right? When we look through that lens, we realize pretty quickly that it is just another example of insider outsider group thinking, and that there are, and that's why I didn't focus on the Christian church. I mention it, but I really focused on these suppressed and marginalized spiritualities to show how it is alive and well transculturally on the planet in many, many different traditions, and pretty much in every single continent, in every single culture.
Yeah. And, I brought it up because it was my real childhood experience. And that is a belief I hold to this day. I may not be practicing like I did as a child, but nobody came in to erase that belief for me. I remember the priest had a ring, right? He wore a ring. And so, of course, as a little child, he's got the ring. You want to know who you're married to. But let's talk about what I read from the forward about us being ready now. Before Constantine, before putting words down that may or may not have existed, before BC, let's just say BC, there were many, 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 many practices, spiritual practices, accepting practices of both male and female spirits, energies, gods, goddesses, whatever you want to call them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our ancestors were pantheists. They really understood that the world, they understood, as I was talking about, this animist view of the world being populated with many different spirits and many different intelligences. And the theurgic practices, right? The practices of having a committed relationship with a deity are there in the Hellenic accounts, they're in the Egyptian accounts, they're in, and it varies culture to culture, because some cultures have a cosmology where there are sort of deities, the Norse accounts, the Indic accounts, I could go on and on. And then there are cultures where the deities are maybe more part of an elemental or a natural manifestation of their relationship to earth, like the Dagara people in West Africa, Burkina Faso, West Africa. So we may call them gods. I use the term spirit because it's just sort of the broadest umbrella term that gets at this idea that these are non-physical human incarnations. We're talking about extraordinary or otherworldly intelligences that are yet nested within our world, right? And nested within our, as a psychologist, I look at it as how are we embedded within these consciousnesses? And some people will argue or say, well, your folks are just making these beings up, right? They're imaginal or imaginary figures, or they're archetypal figures, or they're inner aspects. And then some folks will come down and say, no, these are absolutely externalized beings and deities that we're working with, or entities that we're working with. And I have more of it doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
You're nested within consciousnesses, within consciousnesses, within consciousnesses. And when we step out of thinking that we are the center, the focus, the most important consciousness on this planet, all of a sudden things get much more open and much more interesting in the kinds of conversations that we can have.
And, this is really what really leads to this next point that I want to talk to you about, is because there are many layers of this, like you said, everything from looking at the difference between Haitian Vodou and New Orleans Voodoo, everything about, gender differences, if they even exist. But here's the thing that I love about this. You have so much detail and so much history in the book. It's fascinating. That's why it's not a first read book. You have to go back to it. But there is a part of this book I want to talk to you about when we come back. That's about we call it embodying the divine self within and without. And what I love about the way you present that is, in my interpretation of it, is, and I've been talking about this for years. I was talking about this since Avatar came out. And I said, I think I remember saying something like, what just happened there? Did everybody tap into what just happened there? Right? What did just happen there? If that was, forget about a spiritual ceremony, intervention, whatever you want to call it. But see, that was in our consciousness in order to create that. And people did not question that movie. Now, they may question the second one, right? When the child shows up. But there was so much spirituality in there, and so much spirituality of marriage in there between what seemed to be an earthly and a non-earthly, right? This is now permeating our culture. It shows up in artwork. It shows up in movies. It's showing up in the television shows. It just keeps showing up. So it's the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Did Spirit give us this vehicle so we can become more aware and accepting of it? Or did the vehicle become the initiator so that we can accept that which is already here? Let's take a short break. That's I can't wait to hear what you got to say about that. When we come back, Dr. Megan Rose, drmeganrose.com, fabulous book, Intimate Relationships with Otherworldly Beings. Think about this. You've lost somebody that's passed, but they're on your mind. They're in your home. They're everywhere, embodied in the energy of your space. They speak with you at night. What do you make of that? Well, Dr. Rose has got that to explain as well, because it's all covered here. Let's take a short break, Benny. William will be right back.
All clear.
Thank you.
You'll remind me of the question when we come back.
Well, the question really is an interesting question that we've been playing with for thousands of years.
You're driven,
You know,
and it totally shows. Your career is taking off. You're killing it in the mom game. But did your health needs make it on the plate this week? Tune into the Boss Up Babe radio show, where Marissa Adkins helps babes show up, boss up, and thrive.
From a spirit
Every second and fourth
See,
Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com.
of the
Become
messaging.
the boss babe
Yeah,
you were meant to
we can
be.
talk about
To
Plato
sign up
and
for
the
one of
Daimon
Carissa's
and
group
the
coaching
genius,
programs,
all of that.
visit
But I want to talk about the pop culture too,
dailyhustle.com.
because I think our pop culture.
Tune into the Dr. Diane Show, where we explore
Yeah.
revolutionary
Are you-
expansion
pieces
of
of
mind,
this.
body,
Are you
and soul
familiar
every
with
Thursday at
the
8 a.m.
book, The
Pacific,
Ghost Bride?
11 a.m.
It's also a
Eastern on
Netflix series called
Yes,
transformationtalkradio.com.
that's right. Yeah.
I bring over
Another
20 years of
example of this,
expertise as a mindset
But
warrior,
can you see how
perspective
it's
shifter,
now
and unshakable
so
optimist
accepted in pop
dedicated to helping
culture
you reach your
without
wildest
labeling
dreams
it?
in business,
Mhm,
health,
mhm.
performance,
It is.
and
Those are
relationships.
like the sort of
Join the discussion on the
precursors
show.
to- I mean,
Learn more
even
about me, Dr.
even
Diane,
Tolkien
and receive a free
was
digital
hinting
copy
at
of
this,
my
right?
magazine
Tolkien,
at
when he talks about,
naturalnutmeg.com.
you know, the
Do your ADHD
Numenorians
tendencies get in the way of
and
you doing what you
elves
intend
and
to?
humans and their
Traditional
intermittent
strategies for getting things done may not
and
work
the
for you.
elves sort of go
You
in
need
the
solutions
other
tailored
world.
for your
Basing
unique
that
brain.
all on Celtic
In Bonnie Minku's
mythology
training
and
membership
Norse mythology,
program,
but
Productivity
yeah.
Pathfinder,
You know
learn
what the
ADHD
series is that I
self-mastery
think is
step by
going to really
step
go in
at
this
your own
direction.
pace in a
It
supportive
only has
community
about 2 or
with
3
live
episodes out
online
now.
options
It's
each week.
Halo.
Learn
Oh,
It's
more
the one
about
that's on
Productivity
Paramount.
Pathfinder
You just
at
watched the first episode of that
thrivewithadd.com.
the other night.
How
Yeah.
many times do you
You
find
think
yourself
keep watching
saying,
it?
Well, there's
"It was
one
nothing,"
character
or
in it.
"just doing my
It
job"?
really gets
when
good.
really you knock it out of the
Right.
park.
Watch the first
How
episode,
did you
I was like,
get like
this
this?
is a lot of
Next
explosions.
time someone
No,
tells
no,
you
no,
great
no.
job,
Yeah,
you'll
they
know
have
how
to do
accept
that
it
to
and
show
not
you.
deflect
I mean,
it by listening to
because of all
Courage
the
to Be
game
Seen
players,
radio with host
but
Sherry
wait
Clark.
till you see.
Sherry Clark
I
is
was
an
very
experienced
surprised it
global
got to where
engineering
it got
leader,
by episode
coach, and
3,
mentor.
so by
From
episode
her
2.
experiences,
Cool.
one-on-one
Well, I will
coaching, to
give it
corporate
a watch. I'm a
consulting,
huge
and
sci-fi
executive
fan,
coaching,
so-
There's a
Sherry has
consciousness
learned many
transformation
women
that
need at
happens to the
least
lead
3
character.
things to discover
And
everyday
the
success.
young girl.
Learn about
No,
the
the
ACEs
man.
program.
The
How to survive
Spartan
male-dominated
guy.
fields
Yeah,
with
yeah. Oh,
grace
cool.
and authenticity,
Yeah, it's
and
really.
reach the top without ever once
I think
giving
it's
up on
fascinating,
who
but
you
again,
are.
it's represent.
Courage to Be
It
Seen host
represents so
Sherry
much.
Clark
You know, there
explores
was
the
an article
awesome
that was
power
written
of
about
your
Orlando
entire
Bloom
self and
a
how
number of
far
years
you
ago,
can go by being
when
more you.
people realized
Check out
he
her
didn't have
website,
blonde hair.
couragetobeseen.com,
You have
And
the
he
courage
didn't
to be seen.
look like
Hi,
that
I'm Mary
character.
Jane Mack, and I'm
Almost
excited
like,
to tell you about the latest technology. It
almost
is
like
new
Leto.
to the country,
I mean,
and it's just amazing.
we know him
It's out of
as, he
Germany.
could be
The
Morpheus, he could be the
UV
Joker,
is
he can have the
state-of-the-art
goatee, but he's in a movie now
technology
without
for
any of
changing the
that.
body vibration.
And people
I have more information
that
about the
follow
Healy on
these
my
characters,
website, maryjanemack.com,
they hold them
or you
very
can call the
close to their
office at
heart. It's hard to explain.
888-777-4232.
No, I've had people reach out to me and say, I think I have a spirit marriage with this fictional character. What do I do about that?
Exactly.
And I'm going to hold you to that. Here we go.
Thank you, Benny. Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's so great to have you tune us in and turn us on. You know, there's so much we want to talk about today, but we really want to, you know, get to the place here that really addresses the issue of, you know, how you are in the world, but even more importantly, you know, to have a framework for what your experience is. And what I mean by that is, you know, the framework that may not put you into 2 sessions of therapy a week, but there might be an understanding that has been very acceptable for thousands of years. But here we are today, and thanks to Dr. Megan Rose, right? She's written a fabulous book, Spirit Marriage, Intimate Relationships with Otherworldly Beings. We see this play out in our pop culture. As a matter of fact, it played out before it was even our pop culture. There were so many records that have been indicated, whether they're glyphs, whether they're other things that have indicated that there's something in us as humans that enables us to go to the level of consciousness where we believe so strongly in that level of evolution. We don't say it, we don't write a book like Dr. Rose wrote, but we feel it. We believe it. We can't wait to experience in so many ways. And here we are. Great to have you here. Thank you again. And they can go to your website, drmeganrose.com, right?
Mm-hmm. Learn about me, and spiritmarriage.com is more about the book.
I was asking the chicken and the egg question, and really it's really one of these things. Einstein talked about it a lot. Mm-hmm. And he crossed the bridge of science and spirituality when he started to talk about imagination. And he started to talk about imagination as very, very powerful. You know, yes, information is powerful, but he started to talk about imagination. And, you know, he never really got to take it to quite that next level. Neither did Jung. But here we are today where we have the technology to represent imagery and vision and visions and consciousness and imagination to the point where it's really hard to tell people that particular spirit that just showed up on the big screen doesn't really exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because, you know, if I put my esotericist hat on for a moment, there is this idea of the imaginal realm, or the realm sometimes called the astral realm or the Akashic realms. And they're sort of precursory to physical reality. And they're where we practice or work things out or structure things or plan things. And it's pretty much accepted that in at least more of an indigenous or eco-spiritual worldview, that is real, right, as our physical world. It's just not, it doesn't have the same shaping and forming. What sometimes, if, you know, we want to look at it through a scientific lens, the 5th dimension or the 6th dimension and beyond, right? It's not bound by space or time like we are. And there is all sorts of interesting things that manifest in those realms. And one of the things that happens in those realms is contact with the imaginal, or with the inspiring, the intelligences that inspire us. Plato and Socrates, right, talked about the daimon, the guiding or the tutelary spirit that inspired someone to write a play or a poem or sing a song or form a culture, right? And these spirits and our relationship with them can become very bonded. Socrates was so bonded to his daimonic intelligence that, you know, he wouldn't make major life decisions without its input, right? Without its guidance. And so, it gave rise to the idea of a genius, right? And Orion talks about this in his foreword as well, that the genius is what arises from that love space or from that intimacy, right, between the human and these extraordinary intelligences. And spirit marriage is simply stepping into a devotional relationship, a committed relationship. You know, there's lots of different instances of channeling and mediumship and communication with otherworldly beings through prayer or ritual or other, altered states of consciousness, whether in trance or in the dream state. And the marriage, and again, marriage is the term that I use because it's the most common understanding we have of what this kind of union, what this kind of commitment is. But it's not necessarily, although many cultures practice a spirit marriage ritual, which is, you know, similar to what you were talking about with the nuns. They wear rings and there's vows and there's a whole ceremony around it. It is not necessarily like a marriage in that you're dealing with petty, mundane jealousies or competition or whatever. It's much more this idea of a deeply devoted commitment to that relationality and the co-creative project, right? We talk about all these works of fiction and art and inspiration that arise, and typically they arise because that there is a individual who's inspired by some sort of numinous or extraordinary intelligence that moves through them. And, you know, lest you think that it's just in the realms of, you know, art or esotericism, Carl Jung had a very, very powerful daimonic intelligence, Philemon, that he attributed all of his major theories to. He said, all of my major theories came from these conversations with Philemon. And Rudolf Steiner, right, the anthroposophist, said that all of his teachings came from his relationship with these extraordinary beings that he, and, you know, and interestingly enough, in both of those cases, the families and the followers sort of suppressed those teachings.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jung admitted that. And I've talked about this a lot. There's this buried letter between Bill Wilson and Carl Jung, and Wilson waited 30 years to get back to Jung to thank him for literally creating the foundation of all 12-step programs by the fact that he really pointed to that the only thing that could help the alcoholic was the spiritual experience. That letter got built. It got buried. And, you know, it showed up in certain historical archives of the 12-step programs. But now the internet, right? And then the letter comes up, and you can read in the letter where Jung is admitting he could have done more. He really talked about the spiritual experience and he could have done more, but he didn't talk about it as something that is out of the realm of the everyday person. He talked about it as, you know, this process that every single one of them must have at some level. And I find it fascinating that we're so quick to put boundaries and restrictions on things, right?
Yeah.
Even what we think about, you know, even the idea that something exists that we cannot see, but is guiding us, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and, you know, we here in the West are suffering a sort of under the past, you know, few hundred years of rationalist scientific thinking, right? This sort of scientific materialism that says if you can't break something down to measurable bits and bytes, it doesn't exist. And that is a very Western worldview. You step outside of, you know, really the United States and some of the, you know, more Western oriented cultures, and every other culture on this planet has much deeper, much more animistic tendencies. And so it is very, it is very sort of colonialist of us to say, well, we know what we know.
Yeah, we know.
We've decided, we know this is what's right. Everybody else is right. You hear again and again, primitive cultures and third world and all of these things that we've decided, right, that our worldview based on our agenda really is right. And so to really begin to deconstruct and understand that actually some of our major thinkers had these kinds of extraordinary relationships, I think is really exciting, because it sort of helps us sort of, open up a little bit and kind of get curious and think, where have I been limiting myself? Jung's active imagination is just another way in which we do journey work, right? Which we do guided visualization work, and we love our science here, and science is wonderful for certain things, but proving the soul or the hope or love or these intangible things like devotion and commitment and all of these things, they can't be broken down into quantifiable units.
Yeah, I want to just talk to you. I wish you would address this, because I think I read it somewhere in the book. It's really fascinating that it says children and we grow up, especially in today's world where there's so much about superheroes, supernatural. I mean, it is not the exception as it was a while ago, right? A while ago, the first Dracula movie put people, made them all crazy. Was because we chit chat and then we do work. She was like, "Do you think Kate Beckinsale is going to do another Celine vampire movie?" And I said, if they give her the right script, they will. She said, but they have to do it because there's a child involved now. So you see how this fictional is very real for this young person, right? The whole thing about it is very real.
Well, I mean, I like to say that our pop culture is mythology and folklore. That was the pop culture for our ancestors, the mythology, the folklore.
Exactly. Thank you.
So what we look now back on as the gods and the goddesses and these beings that our ancestors looked at as contemporary to them. I like to think that, anthropologists, religious studies scholars, 200-300 years from now, or maybe even 1,000 years from now, will look back on this time and look at Superman and Batman and all of these different extraordinary characters, right, that we fill our lives with and that we spend so much time and energy devoting attention and worship in a way to. Even our rock stars, even our celebrities fall under this category, and that they will say, oh, those were their deities, right? And there's a way in which, so that sounds like, oh, well, then that's just goofy, that doesn't make sense. But there's actually, if you think about it, there is something that is being teased out through these stories, because they're pulling from mythologies, they're pulling from archetypal figures. And so whether a being shows up as, a Superman, I mean, they very skillfully crafted Superman as a Jesus figure, even in, the more recent Superman movies with Henry Cavill, where he's in the sky looking like a Jesus hanging on a cross. I mean, that blew my mind when I saw that, because I was like, there you go. He's an extraordinary being that comes from another planet, that is raised in the human framework, but is not, but has these divine powers. And so, I do have clients that reach out to me and say, so I think I'm being contacted by this deceased rock star. I don't know what to do about it. And yet, I know that spirit marriage is a thing. And I know that marriage within the purview of spirit marriage, you can be married to a beloved dead and a beloved ancestor. And so what I encourage them to do in those cases is to if you look at it, if you want to look at it through the lens of an ancestor, ancestor worship and ancestor veneration is a widespread practice on the planet. You can look at it through that lens, but you can also look at it through an archetypal deity lens, meaning like, I know someone that is having encounters with David Bowie and David Bowie's spirit. And I was like, to just bring in the divine self, I was like, who do you think David Bowie's divine self was, right? Who do you think his archetypal spirit? And they're like, oh, it was totally Hermes, right? Hermes, the hermaphrodite, the trickster, right? The shapeshifter, this energy that is, both masculine and feminine and an androgen. And they're like, I think I'm having a relationship with Hermes via this Bowie figure, and it can be a both and, or it can be that that deity archetype is flowing through to you and getting your attention in that kind of a way. And
I love that you're talking about that, because I think no matter who you talk to, I think on the face of the earth, they will tell you that some information entered their consciousness and they're not quite sure who or how, may have come from a song they heard. Hello, you hear a song, and then what do? You wake up and you think, oh my gosh, I left my car running. Really? How did you get? But we do. I want to get to, I know we have a few minutes left. You bring us full circle. You give us so much to really think about and look at, and you explain it. But you talk about the future and the future of spirit marriage. I'm curious, from your perspective and where you sit, how much progress have we made in acceptance here? Because there, at some level, we're infiltrating the consciousness of generations to come through the way we're projecting books, imageries. I mean, who didn't want to marry Voldemort? I'm just kidding. I had my moments. But do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that was a character, right? And really presented a very spiritual character, maybe dark, but spiritual. But tell us about the future from where you sit. Where do you see us going?
Well, I think that, a lot of people ask me, okay, well, I don't have a spirit that is asking to marry me, because that is usually sort of the protocol for this. The spirit or the deity will appear or to you or to another person, like a mentor or a spiritual teacher of yours, and say, I want to marry so-and-so. And if that's not happening, that does not mean that these practices aren't applicable to you. We all have a divine self, right? We talk about archetypes, we talk about tutelary and familiar spirits, and we all have these beings around us, whether we're sensitized to them or not. And so we all have a divine self that we are here to express qualities of, and that co-creative project that we could potentially do with them. And so I think that a lot of these stories and the popular culture and the reclaiming of myths and the rise and the embrace, right, of subaltern or previously marginalized spiritualities like, shamanism and witchcraft, and the more pagan spiritualities are finally being included in, like the Academy of Religious, the AAR, and other conversations, is evidence that, we're finally stepping into a little more inclusivity and a little more embracing of other ways of knowing and other ways of being. And spirit marriage is still on the margins, right? It's still a very transgressive and very sort of head-scratching practice for a lot of people, even within paganism, even within earth-based spirituality,
right?
Unless you're raised like in a tradition like voodoo, where from a very early age, that is, just part of the waters that you swim in. I mean, that's a practice front and center in those traditions. But in a lot of pagan circles, it's still like, oh, we don't do that. We don't marry the spirits. And I think that is sort of a leftover of, number one, not really knowing the prevalence of the practice, and so it kind of scares people a little bit. And then number two, our own assumptions about eroticism and intimacy and what is actually going on there. And I mean, that's a whole other conversation we could have around erotic spirituality. But, you know, suffice it to say, not everything that registers as erotic in our body is meant to be sexual.
Yeah. And by the way, erotic spirituality, this is not new. You see, the minute we call it that like people are like, really? That thing that happened over there? That's really it. But you see, this is really so wonderful about your book, is you not only reference, you know, the knowledge and the wisdom and the accuracy of what has come before, but it's really foundational for allow people to look at themselves and honor what they're experiencing as opposed to being shamed about it. See, I think that's the thing that, I mean, there's nothing worse than guilt and shame of oneself to really just crush the spiritual energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of times what happens is, you know, when we come in contact with extraordinary beings, there's a vitalizing aspect to it. It puts our body into exaltation, right? It lights us up like a Christmas tree. And for people who have shame or wounding or trauma around their vital center, which is typically, you know, we typically think of sexuality and vitality in our pelvis, right? Like we locate it down there, but it's actually, you know, from the tantric perspective and the sort of, I mean, this shows up in Taoist alchemy, sexual alchemy, and on and on and on. Our entire bodies, right, are able to channel this vitalizing or express this vitalizing force that is, in essence, a kind of quickening or a kind of activation that happens between humans and divine or otherworldly beings. And it is part of, I think my research really points to, it is part of that, as you referenced, that initiation or that initiatory practice, which transforms us, right? Which quickens us, which awakens and activates us. And I think that that's part of the technology that will get us, as we were talking about earlier, through the Homo universalis consciousness. It brings on our extrasensory.
That's what I'm trying to say. Because look at, you know, generations. I come from a generation where I was not restricted, you know, by my mom, my stepmom, about my fascination with comic books. I mean, I was at a very young age, I was reading them. I was drawing the characters from them. I understood them at a very young age. You know, my dad, on the other hand, just thought I need to go to Dr. Jacoby. But my mom this is a form of creativity. See, and we empower our children to explore that, generally speaking. Some religions are like, you will never look at Iron Man. You will not do that. That's not going to happen. And you clearly are not going to
Harry Potter.
Yeah. And you're clearly not going to look at any gay superheroes. That's just out of the realm of this lifetime for you. But you see, outside of that, we're actually promoting a level of imagination, which will get to the future that you described, I think.
I agree. And I think that, you know, when we allow, and I think this is actually a beautiful thing that's been happening in the late 20th and early 21st century, and that is the permission for adults to play and to imagine and to, you know, the comic books used to be a thing just for kids, and science fiction, Star Wars, it used to be a thing just for children. And now there are, you know, adults in their 50s, 60s and beyond that are huge fans, right? The fan culture of these pop cultural tropes or stories that keep that part of us alive and that speak to that part of us that says, you know, maybe I could be a mutant. Maybe there's something that I'm here to evolve into that is more than just, and people really identify with that because there's a kernel of understanding that we're meant to be something more than just meat suits that punch a clock every day and, and procreate.
And, we know that at the very core of our being. We've been in search of it for centuries, right? And we know that at our very core of our being. But what you do in your book so beautifully is you give us a framework to be both of the earth and not of the earth at the same time, simultaneously. And that really is so important because that really is our experience. You can't tell a mom who's driving down the road and sees a car coming head on with her child in the background that for that moment, she doesn't experience both. The ultimate request for protection of that which she cannot see, right? And yet all of the fear that goes through our bodies in an incident like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the beauty of us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. People become very spiritual in moments of crisis, right?
Yeah. That's a good reason for why I kicked up my spiritual program. Dr. Rose, thank you so much. Again, give out your website. Thank you so much for today.
Yeah, drmeganrose.com.